London, May 1966. Muhammad Ali was at his absolute peak, young, lightning fast, and radiating a level of confidence that bordered on the divine. He was in the heart of London, deep in training for his high-stakes rematch against Henry Cooper, and he was transforming the Islington Gym into his personal theatre of dominance. On that particular afternoon, the air inside the facility was thick with the scent of old leather, bitter sweat, and the rhythmic, violent thud of gloves hitting heavy bags. Ali was in rare form, dismantling his sparring partners with a precision that looked more like a choreographed dance than a brutal sport. He glided across the canvas, his feet barely touching the floor, while his hands moved faster than the human eye could track. To anyone watching, he seemed untouchable, a king in his own private fortress. In the middle of a high-intensity round, Ali's sharp gaze drifted toward the edge of the gym, where a small crowd had gathered to witness the champion in action. Among the onlookers stood a man whose presence usually commanded any room he entered. It was Sean Connery. At that moment, Connery was the most famous actor on the planet, the living embodiment of James Bond, a man defined by his impeccable suits and effortless cinematic cool. To the rest of the world, he was an icon of sophistication and invincibility. But to Muhammad Ali, he was merely another spectator in a well-tailored shirt. Ali saw a Hollywood star, a movie tough guy, who lived a life of luxury far removed from the grit and pain of the boxing world. The champion, never one to miss an opportunity for a spectacle, decided to turn the training session into a public interrogation of British grit. Ali abruptly stopped his footwork, dropped his guard, and leaned against the ropes with a mischievous glint in his eyes. The rhythmic sounds of the gym died down as he focused his entire attention on the Scotsman standing near the shadows. With the cameras rolling and his entourage watching, Ali projected his voice across the room, letting it bounce off the brick walls like a physical force. He issued a mocking, public challenge, calling out the fictional agent 007 and demanding that the man of mystery step into the squared circle to face a real-life threat. Ali's tone was playful, yet laced with a sharp edge of provocation, designed to bait the actor into a graceful retreat that would make for a perfect headline the next morning. He invited the movie hero to prove his worth against the heavyweight champion of the world, questioning whether the man behind the Bond persona had the courage to back up the legend in a place where there were no stunt doubles or multiple takes. The champion stood there, a wide grin plastered across his face, fully expecting Connery to offer a polite wave, a witty remark, or perhaps a humble decline that would keep the mood light and the PR positive. Ali anticipated the typical reaction of a celebrity caught in a crosshair, a mix of flattery and evasion. He waited for the inevitable laughter from the crowd to break the tension, but the expected sound never came. Instead, a heavy, suffocating silence descended over the Islington Gym. The atmosphere shifted instantly from a light-hearted media moment to something far more visceral and unpredictable. The spectators held their breath as all eyes turned toward Connery. The actor didn't smile, didn't joke, and didn't look for an exit. The air grew cold as the playfulness of the challenge met a sudden, unyielding wall of Scottish granite. In that silence, the distinction between the actor and the man began to blur, and Ali realized that the theatre he had just created was about to become very real. Ali froze as he realized that Connery was not smiling. The jovial atmosphere he had tried to cultivate evaporated in an instant, replaced by a sudden, chilling professional focus. The actor moved with a deliberate, haunting calmness that suggested this was not his first time facing an adversary in a confined space. Without uttering a single word, Connery unbuckled his expensive watch and handed it to a stunned bystander before beginning the ritualistic process of preparing for combat. He meticulously wrapped his hands, the white cloth disappearing beneath his palms with a practiced efficiency that spoke of long hours spent in dusty local gyms far from the glitz of London's premier theatres. When he pulled on the heavy sparring gloves, there was no hesitation in his movement, only a grim acceptance of the challenge. Ali, however, still tried to maintain the facade of a light-hearted exhibition. He bounced on the balls of his feet, his tassels flickering as he performed a flashy rendition of his signature shuffle. He dropped his hands to his waist, leaning his head back and wearing a wide, theatrical grin intended to draw laughter from the spectators. He played the part of the untouchable king, certain that the movie star would merely go through the motions for a few minutes before calling it quits. But the moment the bell rang, the energy in the ring underwent a violent transformation. Ali's instinctual radar for danger, honed through hundreds of rounds against the world's most dangerous punchers, suddenly began to scream. Connery did not rush in with the frantic, uncoordinated energy of an amateur looking to land a lucky blow. He did not chase the champion or swing wildly. Instead, he claimed the center of the ring with the grounded stability of an oak tree. He cut off the angles with subtle, economical footwork that forced Ali to keep moving. The actor's guard was high and tight, his chin tucked behind a broad shoulder, and his eyes remained locked onto Ali's chest with a piercing intensity. This was the gaze of a man who had survived the unforgiving back alleys of Edinburgh, a man who understood that a fight was not a performance, but a struggle for survival. The champion felt a surge of genuine unease as he looked across the canvas. He saw past the celebrity persona and the tailored reputation. He realized that standing before him was not a pampered product of the studio system, but 86 kilograms of hardened, functional muscle and raw Scottish fury. Connery moved with a predatory patience that unsettled the champion. Every time Ali attempted a flicking jab to reset the distance, the actor slipped the punch by a fraction of an inch, never overreacting, never giving ground. The silence in the gym became deafening as the crowd realized they weren't watching a stunt, they were watching a legitimate confrontation. Ali's smile began to falter, his lips tightening into a thin line of concentration. He realized he could no longer afford to play the clown. The man in front of him wasn't intimidated by the lights or the legend. To Connery, Ali wasn't the great one. He was simply the target. The weight of the actor's presence filled the ring, a heavy, suffocating pressure that demanded total respect. As they circled, the rhythmic squeak of boots on the canvas sounded like a countdown. Ali shifted his weight, his mind racing to recalibrate his strategy. He had walked into the ring expecting a comedy, but as he stared into the cold, unblinking eyes of the Scotsman, he knew he had stepped into a furnace. The theatre was gone, replaced by the stark, brutal reality of two men measuring each other's souls in the center of a square circle. The air between them crackled with the realization that an error here wouldn't result in a retake, but in a very real and very painful consequence. As they circled the ring, Ali realized he had made a grave miscalculation. Connery was reading his movements with a cold, analytical precision that no ordinary amateur could possess. Behind that unsettling composure lay a history Ali knew nothing about. The biting poverty of the Fountain Bridge slums, the grueling labor of the steel mills, and years spent in the dimly lit, blood-stained boxing gyms of Edinburgh. Connery was not the product of tuxedos and martinis. He was the boy who had been forced to polish coffins at the age of 13, and the man who had knocked out teeth in confrontations with ruthless dockside gangs by 19. Ali threw a testing jab, a strike that usually landed with ease on even seasoned professionals, but Connery evaded it with a short, professional twitch of the head, barely moving enough to let the glove whistle past his ear. In that moment, Ali looked deep into his opponent's eyes and saw a terrifying readiness to go to the very end. This was the result of a life where survival was the only currency. While Ali had been honing his craft in the structured environment of Olympic training centers, the man standing before him had been forged in a much harsher furnace. The Scotsman moved with a heavy, grounded grace that came from years of physical toil. Every muscle in his frame had been built not for aesthetics, but through the heavy lifting of raw materials and the repetitive, bone-breaking work of the industrial North. The way Connery held his center of gravity suggested a familiarity with the sudden violence of the streets, where there were no referees to break a clinch and no bells to signal a reprieve. Ali felt the weight of that experience pressing in on him. He realized that the person in the ring was Tommy, the milkman and the laborer, wearing the mask of Sean, the actor. As the round progressed, the champion noticed how Connery refused to be baited by feints or verbal taunts. The actor stayed behind a tight, classic guard, his lead hand constantly measuring the distance, mirroring the techniques of the old-school brawlers who valued substance over style. Ali tried to up the tempo, shifting his weight to launch a combination, but he found himself shadowed by a man who understood the geometry of the ring. Every time Ali pivoted, Connery adjusted his lead foot, keeping the champion directly in his sights. There was a grim, stoic endurance in the actor's stance, a refusal to be intimidated by the legend or the speed of the man across from him. It was the resilience of a man who had seen the worst of the Great Depression and had come out the other side with nothing but his pride and his fists. Ali began to see the scars of that past in the way Connery carried himself. This was not a sparring session for the Scotsman. It was a reclamation of his true identity. The glitz of Hollywood had been stripped away by the heat of the gym, leaving only the hard, unyielding core of the Fountain Bridge native. The champion understood that he wasn't fighting a movie star who wanted to play at being a boxer. He was fighting a boxer who had been forced by circumstance to become a movie star. The realization sharpened Ali's focus. He saw the way Connery's jaw set, the way his shoulders stayed relaxed yet coiled like springs, and the way he breathed through the exertion with a steady, rhythmic discipline. The fight had shifted from a publicity stunt into a silent dialogue between two men who had both used their bodies to escape the limitations of their birth. Ali respected the steel he found in his opponent's gaze, acknowledging that the spirit of the Edinburgh streets was just as fierce as anything he had encountered in the gyms of Louisville or Miami. The air in the ring grew thick with the unspoken understanding that the next few minutes would be a test of character, not just a display of skill, and Ali prepared himself for a level of resistance he had never anticipated from a man in a starring role. Ali increased his speed, testing Connery's reactions with a barrage of snapping jabs and fluid upper body movement. He began to work with a genuine seriousness, no longer content to simply shadow box around the actor. The tempo of the encounter surged, the sound of leather hitting leather echoing through the Islington gym like gunfire. In a brief moment of overconfidence, the champion began to play with his food, allowing his legendary arrogance to override his defensive discipline. He leaned back against the ropes, dropping his right hand to his hip in a classic display of showmanship, inviting the Scotsman to take a shot. In that exact microsecond, Connery saw the opening and didn't hesitate for a heartbeat. He stepped in with a violent, explosive weight transfer and threw a devastating left hook that came from the very soles of his feet. The fist whistled through the air, missing Ali's chin by a mere 5 inches. The punch was delivered with such raw, unadulterated power that the champion actually felt the rush of displaced air against his skin, a physical warning of the destruction that had just narrowly bypassed him. Ali recoiled instantly, snapping back into a high guard as his face went cold and intensely serious. He understood in a flash of clarity that if that blow had connected, the headlines of the world's newspapers the following morning would have announced the humiliating downfall of the greatest at the hands of a movie star, effectively torching his reputation and his career. The playfulness was dead. For the remainder of the session, the sparring match transformed into an authentic, high-stakes battle. The atmosphere in the gym curdled into something primal as two apex predators traded heavy leather, each man probing the other for weakness and testing the structural integrity of their opponent's resolve. Gone was the celebrity and the champion. There were only two fighters locked in a silent, brutal exchange of respect and power. Ali moved with a frantic, desperate grace to stay ahead of the Scotsman's heavy-handed pressure, while Connery continued to march forward with the grim persistence of a man who had nothing left to lose. They exchanged sharp, stinging blows that would have leveled lesser men, neither giving an inch of ground as the intensity reached a fever pitch. Every punch thrown carried the weight of their respective legacies, turning the canvas into a proving ground where the only thing that mattered was the ability to endure and return fire. The spectators watched in stunned silence, realizing they were no longer witnessing a publicity stunt, but a raw collision of wills between two men who refused to be broken by the other's myth. The final gong echoed through the gym, cutting through the thick tension like a blade. Ali was the first to move, crossing the canvas not with a boastful strut, but with a profound sense of urgency and newfound respect. He reached out and pulled Connery into a firm, genuine embrace, his breathing heavy and his chest heaving from the exertion. He was visibly shaken, his usual mask of supreme invincibility momentarily displaced by the raw reality of what had just occurred on the wood and canvas. As they stepped out of the ring, dripping with sweat and adrenaline, the champion faced the gathering swarm of reporters and photographers with a look of startling intensity. He wasted no time on poetic descriptions or clever rhymes, declaring to the press with blunt honesty that the man standing beside him was dangerous in a way few could comprehend. Ali understood in that quiet aftermath that he had encountered a kindred spirit, a man who, much like himself, had clawed his way out of the shadows of poverty and the crushing weight of low expectations to redefine his own destiny. This accidental collision of worlds, born from a playful taunt, rapidly solidified into a deep and unwavering friendship that would span the next 3 decades. In the years that followed, when the political tides turned and Ali faced his darkest hour, stripped of his title and banned from the sport for refusing to compromise his conscience during the Vietnam War, Connery stood as a steadfast ally. The actor used his global platform to defend the champion's right to follow his principles, recognizing the same stubborn steel in Ali that had carried him through the slums of Edinburgh. As the two legends eventually walked out of the Islington gym and back into their respective lives, they shared a secret knowledge that the public could never fully grasp. They knew that when the lights are bright and the world is watching, titles, wealth, and fame are merely illusions that vanish the moment a fist is cocked. They had looked into each other's eyes in the heat of a real struggle and confirmed a fundamental truth. In the final reckoning, status means nothing, and the only thing that remains is the true quality of the man underneath. They left the building not as a movie star and an athlete, but as two survivors who had tested their limits and found them unbreakable, bonded by a code of honor that required no words and no witnesses.